former national security advisor, the official opposition leader, and, of course, our journalist. Speaking of foreign affairs, Canada has officially recognized the overthrow of the presidency in Venezuela. We'll talk to our last ambassador to that oil-rich country about what happened now. And the world's elite are gathering in the snowy ski resort town of Davos, Switzerland, but the grass growers are getting a lot of attention. That's grass as a marijuana. We talked to a cannabis investor about the World Economic Forum going to pot. But first, we've been doing a delicate diplomatic dance between two superpowers fighting over the deportation of Huawei's Meng Wanzhou to the United States to face fraud charges. That took a sharp U-turn into candid legal advice from a surprising source today. Canada's ambassador to China, John McCallum, told invited reporters that the Chinese national has a strong case to avoid the extradition order.
But I think she has quite good arguments on her side. One, political involvement by comments from Donald Trump in her case. Two, there's an extraterritorial aspect to her case. And three, there's the issue of Iran sanctions, which are involved in her case, and Canada does not sign on to these Iran sanctions. So I think she has some strong arguments that she can make before a judge.
Prime Minister Trudeau was asked about this unusual diplomatic intervention earlier today.
It includes the opportunity for her to mount a strong defense. That is part of our justice system, and we are going to apply that justice system in its integrity as all Canadians and indeed as people around the world expect us to do as a country.
All right, the Chinese tabloid The Global Times had a bit of an ominous, unofficial, but undoubtedly government-sanctioned warning today. In an editorial, it cautioned that, quote, arresting Meng is obviously part of the U.S. actions to crack down on Huawei. Anyone with a brain can clearly see Washington's intention to stop rising Chinese high-tech companies in the name of the law. One thing should be very clear. If Ottawa successfully assists Washington in the extradition of Meng, then Beijing will retaliate against both of them without doubt. Well, let's put this to the ultimate reality check. Dick Fadden is a former CSIS director and national security advisor to Stephen Harper. Joins me in the studio. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Have you? I got to get your thoughts on what went through your mind when you heard these comments. Did you go, oops, that's a big oopsie?
I think I said to myself, unity of purpose and unity of message in cases like this and dealing with a very, very difficult file is very important. It seemed to me that what Mr. McCallum said was a bit of variance of what the Prime Minister's been saying. When I was taught throughout my career in the public service, both ministers and officials of the government do not comment on matters before the courts. I can understand why he's doing it. He's trying to find something positive in all of this. I don't think it was a great idea.
Any thoughts as to whether an ambassador saying this would have that script approved by the Prime Minister's office before he said it, or is he freelancing?
I don't know if he was or not, but in my experience, when there's a very difficult, sensitive file, ambassadors are well advised to clear what they're going to say with their masters, be they in the Foreign Ministry or the Prime Minister's office. I don't know if Mr. McCallum did or not. If he did not...
The only person probably ever watched this is me.
In the former Lavalin law.
Hasn't he taken, though, it out of the straight rule of law prevails discussion and put it into a political question as a result of this?
I think he's being practical. You know, I don't know if you're calling it political or not. I just call it he's being practical. You know, he hasn't violated any law. He hasn't done anything that's appalling.
We'll see if I'll survive to see it, I guess.
By a fairly strict definition of
You never know.
I think what he suggested to them right now...
One day you're here, next day, boom, you're gone.
That's not a good thing right now in our relationship with China. So I think it would have been better for him to take that message with him, go back to Beijing and convey it to anybody.
Gotta give myself some advice here.
Good message, publicly, I'm not so sure.
And he's not saying anything that's not probably true, right?
I suspect he's right. I'm not an expert in extradition law, but I do know it's a fairly convoluted
Keep this damn hair cleaner.
There's no harm in anybody expressing their views, except he is an agent, a formal agent of the federal government. He's very close to the Prime Minister. And saying it at this point in time, in particular, if he didn't clear it, and he may well have, I think he's going to send mixed messages to the Chinese. And as I said at the beginning, unity of purpose and unity of messaging, and you're dealing with I think pretty important.
I'm pretty certain that China's President Xi isn't jumping out of bed going, Eureka, we've got him now. This probably isn't going to register much in China, is it?
I don't think it is. I was just thinking about this earlier today. If I were the foreign minister of China, what would I sort of deduce from this? I would deduce that somebody's trying to advance the file in his own way. China doesn't really react in this way. They have articulated very, very strongly, and one would even say harshly, a position on all these issues with Huawei. This is not going to make any difference.
I want to get your thoughts, if I could, on just sort of an overview on how Trudeau's handled it, notwithstanding what happened from his ambassador yesterday. Is he doing the right thing? Some people have counted it up, and he's almost done 20 connections, either him or Chrystia Freeland, with foreign powers to try and get them behind Canada and making China aware of the sensitivity and the consequences of this. Are they doing it the right way?
I think fundamentally they are. I mean, there's a real shift in power on the planet right now, and I don't think we in the West, or China for that matter, is really adapting.
That's over
China
with.
is not going to pay a great deal of attention to Canada, and that's one of the things that I think we have difficulty accepting. So I think the PM and Ms. Freeland's attempt to garner support from our allies around the world is a good idea. I'm not entirely sure they needed to tell us every time they got a new country on side, but that's a different issue. I think that was actually fundamentally the right thing to do. And in fact, I think in a situation like this, it would be useful if Canada had what the American called a bipartisan policy. I think they should brief the opposition leaders. The opposition should try and make some suggestions if they can, and mount a common front. I don't think that's what's happening right now, and it's one of those other things that are going to leave the Chinese a little bit confused.
Now, as a national security advisor, obviously national security is part of it, and I know where you are on the Huawei and the 5G network. You think we probably should disconnect from that, but now is probably not the time to do it, right? What do you see in terms of timing? What do you see?
I'm not sure I'd do it next week. On the other hand, our extradition process is quite slow. It's not something that's going to be over in a month or two necessarily, particularly for our appeals. So I think we have a balancing act to put into play here. We are of and in the West, and the West right now is pretty unanimous in saying that allowing Huawei access to national communications infrastructure is not a good thing. So if we keep delaying and delaying on this, eventually we're going to annoy our Five Eyes partners, a goodly number of our NATO allies. So there's a balancing act. I mean, I actually don't envy the government. I think this is not an obvious way out of this. But I would argue that I can't think of anything that another government could have done better. This is an awful situation, and they're trying to move the file. And I think it's going to take a little bit of patience, and I think we should do everything we can to lower the public discourse. I'm not sure that every time the Chinese say something that we consider to be unacceptable, that we should, in our own way, go back at them. Let's do some quiet diplomacy and try and lower the blood pressure.
All right, good advice. We'll see where they take it. All right, Dick Fadden, thanks for coming in. Appreciate that.
My pleasure.
All right, let's get some political reaction. All right, Andrew Scheer is the official opposition leader. He joins me in the studio. Mr. Scheer, what do you make of McCallum's comments?
This is unacceptable. Here we have the spokesperson for the Government of Canada weighing in on an independent judicial case, and our judicial system, our proceedings, need to have integrity around it. So to have this type of comment is completely unacceptable, and he needs to be held responsible for his actions.
And what would you do?
I would fire him. The situation with China right now is at a very strained point. That goes without saying. We have to be very, very careful as a country, and our government needs to be taking this very, very seriously. Our whole point, our whole argument to the Chinese has been that we operate under the rule of law. We don't have a system where a politician can pick up the phone and get a desired outcome from a judge or from a proceeding. And then to have the very person who is speaking for Canada in China start telegraphing that perhaps, the case might go one way or another. That's very concerning.
I'm trying to figure out if he went rogue or was freelancing, or if this is a change in government tactics. Are you able to figure that out?
Well, we have some very serious questions for Justin Trudeau because John McCallum was testifying before parliamentarians. He's been in Ottawa. He's been speaking with high-ranking officials in our own government, and then he goes out and does this just a couple of days later. Is this part of a plan? Is this something that he did under the direction of the government? If so, that is a very, very concerning change in approach to our relationship with China.
He's no slouch. This guy's been a cabinet minister. He's a senior economist. He's not a lawyer. He acts like he's handing out legal advice. But, I mean, how do you go so wildly off script and not know what you're saying is really a major intervention in a very super sensitive case?
Well, it's not the first time that we've seen the Trudeau government mishandle things because they don't give these situations the grave concern that they warrant. And so to have our ambassador go off like this, especially in the way that it was chosen to do, only a select few media outlets, with a seemed to be a message directly to the government of China, this is very concerning. Again, if we're going to stand up for Canadians, stand up for our own proceedings here in Canada in the future by saying they operate independent from politicians, the government does not weigh in, does not affect these types of things, we need to show and send a swift message to the world, and especially the government of China right now, that these types of comments are not acceptable.
Do you read that this is us taking sides with China against the States? Because he certainly fingers President Trump as being a way for this legal bullet to be dodged.
There are many people who have expressed concern, including myself, about the way that President Trump linked a judicial criminal investigation with a trade dispute, and that's fine. There are many people who have that opinion. There will be lawyers who will no doubt argue that. But John McCallum's not just a professor at a university. He's not just someone writing an article, a think piece in a publication. He is our person in China. He is the representative of our government, and when he says something like that, it carries a much different kind of weight to it, and that's why our representatives have to choose their words very, very carefully, especially when the lives of Canadians are hanging in the balance. We have Canadians in prison in China being mistreated, and then we have our own ambassador just tossing out words like this. It's very irresponsible.
I haven't had you on since this crisis really escalated in the last few weeks, but I'm curious if you think you're alluding to that Trudeau until now seems to be doing more or less the right thing: quiet diplomacy, rallying allies around the world, putting pressure on China in a more subtle way. Would you have done anything differently in the last, say, 3 weeks to deal with this crisis?
I would have done things much differently from a different starting point. First of all, I don't admire the basic dictatorship of China. Justin Trudeau said that. Justin Trudeau said he admires the basic dictatorship of China. This is what happens in basic dictatorships. You get political interference in independent proceedings. You get, interference in investigations and using the courts in China as retribution for independent cases here. I would have made a very clear much earlier that I would ban Huawei from the 5G auction. Right now, this is being used as a bargaining chip. Had we taken that off the table from a much earlier point, that would not be part of the conversation.
Now we can't, right? Now we're kind of locked in. We take it off the table. We might as well say goodbye to Mr. Schellenberg.
We've lost our leverage because Trudeau failed to do what our partners did in other countries, and that is come down clearly and firmly on the side of national security by banning Huawei from the auction on their spectrum.
One interesting starting point that would have been different if John Manley was, say, Prime Minister. He said that Canada was aware that this arrest was going to have to be done days before it happened, and he thought that the PMO should have warned Meng Wanzhou not to come into Canada, that that's where there was an arrest waiting for. Do you see that as a realistic tactic, or do you think that's something we should have never got into?
Well, I'll leave it to others to speculate to that kind of, what could have happened, what might have happened. I believe that it's clear that the government of China, the president of China, does not respect Justin Trudeau, does not take his position seriously on these types of things. We've lost opportunities to show that strength. Trudeau still hasn't picked up the phone to call the president of China. We just talked about the Huawei situation still being used as a brokerage chip. That's unfortunate. I believe we're in this situation because of the choices and decisions that Trudeau has made.
I'm going to ask you one quick question. You did announce this week your policy on Quebec, sort of an outreach, including immigration ideas and single income tax form, that sort of thing. And Brian Palliser yesterday came out swinging saying, it's Quebec using brokerage style politics. They're promising supporting Quebec in exchange for things from federal leaders. Is that what's going on here, or is Palliser off script as well?
I don't think it's a very constructive message. What we have with the situation in Quebec is the same in many ways as the government of Ontario, asking the federal government for compensation for the costs associated with the illegal border crossings. The fact that over 30,000 people have crossed into Canada illegally, those costs falling to the provincial governments, things like healthcare and housing and education. And when the province of Quebec or Ontario says, hey, wait a minute, if the Prime Minister, whose famous tweet caused this problem in the first place, is not going to do anything to solve the problem, the least they can do is help address the situation. That's a reasonable request. That's something that